Okay, hello everyone, welcome back to a new video. We need to talk about Vauban, and specifically his new interaction with Jade Stars. Jade Stars is an ability that you will probably have seen all over the place, but I've cooked up a weird little build with Vauban that you might be interested in. So I will transition into the simulacrum, and then we can do some explanation about all of the builds that I made. Okay, so here we are. Let's have a look at the builds and what I mean with a weird build that I've cooked together. Okay, so first let's just go over Vauban, what Vauban does, and what sort of changed after his rework, which happened a couple of months ago. First, his passive. His passive is that you deal times 1.25 damage to incapacitated enemies. This basically means if an enemy is crowd controlled by either a slow, a stun, or anything like that, you will deal times 1.25 damage to them, which is pretty great. Then we have Tesla Nervos. This ability didn't really get changed too much. The only thing that really got changed ever since the rework was introduced was the pathing of these Tesla Nervos. So in the past they were kind of unreliable, they sort of went all over the place, but nowadays their pathfinding is being updated and it's actually a lot better. So it will actively seek out enemies and attach to them. Then we have Minelayer. This used to be a cycle ability where you could go through 4 different kinds of mines that you could throw down. What they did is now you just have 2 mines, so it's either a tap cast or a hold cast ability, which results in a Tether Flechette Orb or a Vector Overdrive pad. The Tether Flechette Orb is coded as a weapon. This is important for some of the buffs that you will be able to apply to it, which I will get into later. What this basically does is it tethers enemies together, it groups them up a little bit, and it will then shoot out these puncture projectiles, which will damage enemies. Fun fact about this ability is that the puncture damage that it deals is actually scaled to the enemy level that it damages. So if you go to something like level cap, you will actually get more and more damage the longer you stay in the mission and the higher the enemy levels will get. What is important to note here is that the scaling of this ability needs to be improved. You can do that in a multitude of ways, which I will get into. Then we have the Subsume, which is Jade Stars. This is a recently introduced Subsume from the Warframe brothers Sirius and Orion, also sometimes called Sour Cream and Onion. This ability is actually quite good as it will put heat procs and damage on enemies whenever you deal damage with either your weapons or abilities. And you can probably sort of see where this is going because our Tether Flechette Orb is dealing damage all the time. Then finally we have the 4th ability from Vauban, which is Bastille. Bastille makes it so that enemies are suspended in the air, which will have they will then have their defenses stripped. So this includes shields as well as armor. Once the defenses are stripped, they will actually be leached onto you. So what happens is that if you strip armor, for instance, from some Arcane units, you will gain that armor back. And this will be capped at 1500 armor, which is actually quite nice because it means that you can trigger things like Arcane Persistence to stay alive, but also things like Primary Bulwark on your primary weapons to gain 500% extra damage. After the duration of Bastille has ran out, it will actually become a Vortex, which will then instead suck enemies to a specific spot and deal a bunch of magnetic damage on them. You will deal damage every second, and dealing damage every second with this Bastille ability is able to trigger Jade Stars. Also, the electricity that is put on enemies by Tesla Nervos that passively seek out enemies while you are playing the mission will also apply this Jade Stars effect and heat damage. And as I said, we also have the Tether Flechette Orb, which will do the same. The only thing that I also have to mention about the second ability for the Vector Overdrive pad is that this damage multiplier is a universal bonus. So it will apply to coded as weapon abilities as well, which means that your Tether Flechette Orb will be buffed by this damage too. But it's not only the Tether Flechette Orb or coded as weapon abilities, as all weapons in the game will be able to benefit from it, which means that you can get some crazy damage on your weapons as well because it's a final multiplicative increase. Okay, so with all of that covered, we can quickly go over the Archon Shards. The Archon Shards are casting speed times 2 because we will continuously throw out our abilities. I have some extra ability duration, and then finally I opted for some ability strength. But honestly, this final shard is for you to choose. There's a whole bunch of different options that you have. You could also run an Equilibrium Shard. You could run extra ability damage on enemies that have electricity procs on them from Tesla Nervos, which is quite good because it's multiplicative to the damage from Minelayer. So there's a ton of options. The reason why this build is actually so strong is not specifically because of Jade Stars dealing damage. The only thing we really use Jade Stars for is to be a super easy enabler for Arcane Hot Shot. And the reason why we want to enable Arcane Hot Shot is because this critical chance that we get from it, which is 300% once it's maxed, actually works on our Tether Flechette Orb. So this makes it so that we deal orange crits, and then together with Worthy Camaraderie, we will actually have a chance to also deal red crits on enemy weak point hits, which the Flechette Orb can get. And what is also quite interesting to note is that if you use something like a Scourge or Scourge Prime, which is a primary weapon that I will showcase in a little bit, you can almost guarantee these weak point hits, so even more damage. Then I use Prime Sure-Footed because not being on your ass is a huge DPS increase, right? Vigorous Swap is another universal weapon damage bonus, which means it also works on our Flechette Orbs, and this is actually multiplicative to the Factor Overdrive pad buff, so these 165, which is basically a 2.65 multiplier, will stack with this 1.73 multiplier. And then for the modding, it's basically just a ton of ability strength. I went with Archon Vitality, but this is not necessarily needed because I will get into that why, but for this build specifically, Archon Vitality is not really needed, so you could swap it out for Rolling Guard, which would have my preference. I went with Primed Flow for a bunch of energy. I have Archon Stretch because Archon Stretch is able to be triggered from our Tesla Nervos, which just gives us some extra energy, although it's not necessary, so you can also get away with a normal stretch right there. The range is also not super necessary, but it's just nice to have for some of these abilities. And then finally, I close out the build with some ability duration. As you will see, so for the Arcanes, we have Hot Shot. We also have the new Arcane Sculptor. And Vauban actually spawns a bunch of different objects with all of his abilities. All of his abilities basically spawn objects, although Proton Strike, I believe at least the new version of it doesn't count as an object anymore, so it doesn't trigger Arcane Sculptor, but Bastille, Minelayer, and Tesla Nervos all trigger Sculptor, so you will basically be sitting at a 175 ability efficiency all the time, which means your stuff is super cheap to cast, which means you can spam everything everywhere, which is great. So that's it for the Vauban build. Then where this build gets really crazy is when we use a Huras Kubrow or a Shade Prime, Prisma Shade or normal Shade, which is able to give us invisibility. This is for the Huras, this comes from the Stalk ability, and this is actually the build that I ended up using. So the Stalk ability cloaks you, and as long as you don't attack with any of your weapons, which we will not really be doing because we are only casting abilities, we will stay invisible. As I said, you could also use the shade for this. So you have the normal shade, the Prisma shade, and the Shade Prime. If we look at the build for the Shade Prime, it will look something like this, which I've used on Saku before. This is quite nice because you have Guardian, which is basically an extra free shield gate, as well as Sacrifice, which is quite nice. But it's mainly about the Ghost mod that we can use to also gain this invisibility, just like the Huras Kubrow. I do prefer the Huras Kubrow a little bit over the Shade Prime. And that's because it's a beast companion, and with the beast companions we can use these resourceful retriever mods or retriever mods in general, which gives us extra loot or credits. So yeah, that's also very nice to have. Then, as I said, because we are invisible, it actually means that we don't really have to build for any tankiness, because enemies won't really be targeting us. And if they are targeting us, we have our Rolling Guard invincibility, or just in general, there will be so much stuff on the ground that we will heal back. So for the weapons, because you want to really stay invisible, I can't really recommend too many things. The Praedos is very nice because of the Incarnate perks, which give you a bunch of parkour velocity as well as speed. I've used the Azima, but this is mainly for the other version of this build that I will go into in a little bit. You can use secondary fortifier and then use the alternate fire to basically have a continuous source of overguard. And then the Strun Prime is here to deal with acolytes. And as I said, because Vauban gets this 1500 additive armor, it's really easy to trigger primary bulwark, so that's why that's there. If you want to look at the Riven, it's critical chance and status chance, but this can easily be replaced by damage or anything that you would want. Okay, so that's it for the builds. For the focus school, we can look at what I have chosen. I have chosen Madurai, and that's mainly because, whoa, we are buggy. That's mainly because Madurai has the Sling Strength passive. So the Sling Strength passive adds 40% extra ability strength, which buffs our Flechette Orb damage, it buffs our Bastille strip rate, it buffs our Vector Overdrive pad damage, which is multiplicative. So this is a very nice little thing to have. And in general, I'm just a big Madurai enjoyer. Also, if you have the Tauron strike, the Thara Tauron strike for Madurai, once you are able to use it, Jade Stars will just make sure that it goes absolutely nuts, and you will have the Rain of Arrows perk being triggered all over the place across the entire map. Okay, so those are pretty much all of the builds that I wanted to discuss and the things that you can use to make this a little bit more efficient and a lot more powerful. I will now do a small showcase, and it depends on whether our Huras is able to make us invisible or not. Sometimes it doesn't really want to trigger, especially in the simulacrum. What you basically do in a mission is you throw out your Tesla Nervos, you put down a Bastille, you can see that Sculptor is triggering, you can see that we have our armor, and then we activate Jade Stars. You can see that we get a bunch of heat procs on everything is already dying. Then we throw out our Flechette Orb, and as you can see, we get orange crits. So this basically one-shots level 220 heavy gunners on Steel Path. Okay, but that's basically how you play this build. In the mission itself, you will be invisible, and I will show that in a little bit. There's also another version of this build where you use Arcane Persistence. Of course, you will still have your Jade Stars here, but this is just for the modding. So the only thing that really changes is we don't use Vigorous Swap anymore. We go towards using Equilibrium, and Archon Vitality here is actually needed because we need our health to be higher than 500, really, or ideally, to make sure that we have Arcane Persistence as sort of this health gate. The way we actually get our health back is by swapping our companion for this health tanking build, and we will go towards this build where we have Hunter Recovery. And I use the Panzer Vulpaphyla for this health build specifically because it's able to spread viral quills on enemies, and these viral quills will actually count towards Hunter Recovery, which means that you are continuously healed for a bunch of health, which is way over 500, so you will be completely fine. Also remember that you have this 1500 armor, so you also get quite a nice bit of damage reduction. So yeah, let me go into some missions. What I can also say is if you are using the health tank build, you can use secondary fortifier on the Azima, which I've covered before, and you can actually go towards using the Scourge, as I mentioned, which is able to give you a bunch of headshots. So if I spawn back our heavy gunners, I will actually show this. If you throw the Scourge and then you throw your Flechette Orb, you will hear that you are getting a bunch of headshots. And there you hear the headshot sound effect, so it triggers a little bit more often. So what you could do is, if you are health tanking, you can use the Scourge and throw that around to get the headshot effect on enemies. Okay, so I will go into some gameplay. I will see you there, and I will sort of explain how I go about using this build in something like a survival mission. Also for the Azima build, I wanted to jump into the gameplay, but I forgot to go over the modding for a little bit. What you want to do with this Azima build is you want to build it for gas damage, and then you want to include as much status duration as you can. So at the moment I have Augur Seeker in here for 90% extra duration, and I also have this status duration Riven mod. What you could also do, I believe there's an other status duration mod. So if you have Perpetual Agony, you could actually use this instead of the Riven mod that I have here. Okay, so I think that's now everything covered, so I will hop into a mission and I'll see you there. Okay, so here we are. It was a circular survival with a nice relic bonus, so it was actually a fissure. So I like dropping an energy pad just to get yourself going. Jade Stars, then some Bastille, and then we start throwing our vector pads down. We can also throw around some Nervos, and then we can do some Overdrive. And yes, why am I throwing 4? They actually stack, and they stack multiplicatively. So I didn't show this in the simulacrum, but you can basically see from the damage already. that we are dealing absolute ludicrous amounts of damage. So these vector pads stack 4 times on top of each other. At the moment, it means that we have our damage, initial damage, times 1.73, then that damage times 1.73, and then that damage times 1.73 again. And I believe even another time, I don't know if it was 3 or 4, which I mentioned there. But yeah, we can Void Sling into the ground, and then we can throw our pads for all of the damage buffs. We can do our Jade Stars. If we stay close to this little dude, he gives us even more ability strength, which is amazing. We throw down our Bastilles, and we throw our... That's 4 million damage. We throw our Flechette Orbs down. And as you can see, we are invisible as long as you don't attack with anything. So no melee attacks, no weapon attacks. You will stay invisible and enemies don't really know what they have to do. Now, what you could also do is if you have some trouble with survivability, you could drop something like a Dante Spectre. And Dante is able to give you Overguard, as you can see. And this Overguard will actually regenerate once we get some kills. Although I'm not entirely sure whether it also triggers on ability kills. Doesn't seem to be the case. But still, Dante is able to give you some Overguard here and there. Very nice to have. We also got his little book. And if you want to, and you want to get a bunch more damage, you could also use a Nidus Spectre. And Nidus is able to link you, and it will give you a 28% damage buff, as you can see in the top right now. This 28% damage buff is actually multiplicative to all of your ability strength. So it increases your ability strength by another 28%. And it also increases your coded as a weapon damage abilities. So this will slowly but surely go absolutely crazy. And as you can see, all we really have to do is just walk around, maybe throw down some nice vector pads for ourselves, throw some Bastilles down, and our Flechette Orbs, 28 million damage headshot. Completely balanced. What I can also say is that once Jade Stars will likely get a line of sight, it's a little bit less easy to keep Hot Shot up, I would say, because you are mostly relying on your Tesla Nervos as well as your Vortex from your 4th ability. There was Mania, and he's instantly gone. Amazing. But you are mainly relying on your 4th ability as well as 1st ability. And they go outside of your line of sight, which means that if Jade Stars will get line of sight at some point, this setup will be a lot less reliable to trigger Hot Shot and get those orange and red crits. However, what you could then do, which is why I linked Nesha, is you could subsume on Firewalker. And if you trigger Firewalker, one, you will be immensely quick with the Vector Pad Overdrive thing, but you will also be able to trigger fire damage outside of your line of sight, because you will leave a trail that lasts for quite a long time if you also have some nice positive duration, which will then still trigger Hot Shot. So this build will still be viable if they patch out the Jade Stars interaction, but at the moment this is the preferred way of doing it, because we just get ludicrous amounts of heat procs everywhere. We strip armor, we do everything. So yeah, that's pretty much everything for the build. I'll wait for the 5-minute mark before I leave the mission so I can get my juicy loot. But that's pretty much all you need to know about this Vauban build. And then after this, I will go into the health tank build that I've also made, and I will talk a little bit about how I go about playing that one. I also didn't really show the Praetos build that I have for the melee, but you mainly use the Praetos for the Incarnon perks. And what you could do, and what I do have at the moment, is I have put a melee Careen on, which is another melee arcane that I will flash on screen. But as you can see, what this does is it will freeze enemies once you roll through them, which is a nice bit of crowd control. Okay, so let's make our way towards extraction. And there we are. So that's pretty much the invisible Vauban build. Okay, so we are back this time with the health build. We pretty much have the same setup for the beginning. Wait a little bit for our energy pad to help us out. Throw our Flechette Orb down. Slowly get some kills. Slowly get some energy. Throw our Nervos out. Make sure everything is nice and activated. And there we pretty much go. As you can see, we are healing like crazy, so don't really have any issues with that because of our Panzer Vulpaphyla. with the viral quills, we can just run around, chill, throw all of our abilities out. This time we will also get viral from the Panzer, which will be another massive damage increase, another 4.25 times damage increase. So already some 4 million critical hits. This build is nuts, man. Okay, we can get some of our Vector Overdrive damage. Sure that we pair it with this guy. Kabloom. There we go. 5 million Nervos out there. Oh, hello, new Loca. Hello, hello. Okay, well, that's pretty much everything you need to know, because at this point we are just throwing our abilities down and having a great time. Energy is a little bit more of a problem on this build. And what I also forgot to mention is that if you have Tenacious Bond on your companion, this will actually also increase the critical damage that you get from your Flechette Orbs. So this is quite, I would almost say, mandatory to have, because it's another 1.2x on your critical damage, and this also scales with the orange crits. So this 1.2x will actually become 2.4, I believe, on your orange crits. So yeah, this is basically the same playstyle. We're doing the same thing, but we just have a different means of survivability. As I said, if you want to get some more overguard, what you could do is throw this Azima on the ground, which will also nicely passively trigger our Jade Stars. And what you could do is throw your Scourge Prime if you are using it to get some more headshots here and there. As you can see, I'm also getting a little bit of overguard right now. A rank 0 secondary fortifier will be enough, because we only really care about the overguard gate. We don't really care about how much overguard we have. We just care about having any at all. And then we can stack our overdrive damage. Oh, and now you can see that I also have the Thara Tauron strike. So I will show you what happens once you use that. Everything dies. Okay, so another 5 minutes. Another Paris Prime lower limb. And it's time to leave. Quickly get rid of these dudes. Get some nice Thrax Plasm. And we can make our way towards the extraction. So yeah, that's pretty much all that I wanted to show for this specific video and this build. I didn't go super in depth into Vauban, but I hope I gave you some insights in how his abilities currently work and what you can sort of do with them. Hot Shot working on your Flechette Orb is pretty busted. But yeah, at some point I will probably revisit the Vauban guide that I did quite a while ago. But that will be another type of video where I also edit it all nicely together. For now, I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a like if you've learned anything. I'm sure that I've covered some niche, weird interactions that you didn't know. With that being said though, I hope to see you in the next one, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Bye.